talked about our schooling and we jumped into the actuarial profession, and now we're doing this thing. And both of us have had careers that have spanned a little bit of time now. And so as you reflect back on your career, particularly given that you're retired now, what is stands out to you as one of your biggest career accomplishments and what you're most proud of as it relates to your career?
Yeah. Um, as I look back and I think through, what went on, I find that there were certain events that stand out, not necessarily because I was proud in particular, but because there were turning points where if things had gone the other way, it would have turned out quite different. And I probably would not be here today in this context. The first one that comes to mind was I sort of picking up where I left off. I went back to Jamaica. I joined R. Watson and Sons. It's a British firm. I had done an SOA exam, and so the question came up whether I would do at that time institute exams or SOA exams. So all of the people who were ahead of me were fellows of the institute, fellows and associates of the institute. So so I went to the boss. Of course, he has his fellowship. Where I said, I'm having difficulties which I shouldn't have, and I basically made a case for the fact that the U.S. is closer to Jamaica, so on and so forth, and I'd like to do the SOA exams. And he said yes on the spot. And had he decided no, that he wasn't going to allow that, I would not be, the history would have been very, very different for me. So that was a sort of an important turning point, and the fact that Ian was able to allow me to do that. The next significant one I think that I'll point to was my first diversity training. And now by this time I had moved to Nationwide, and the chief actuary of Nationwide, his name was Harvey Galloway. He was the one who sort of introduced diversity. Very interesting. And the fact that it came from the top was very, very, very important. And you know that. And any company, if these things come from the top, it makes a huge difference. And so he had a training for all of his senior FSAs, senior FSAs in their job, and of course most of them, I think all of them, were white male, and I had not yet got my fellowship, but I was invited to be a part of it for some strange reason. So that was also, that sort of launched, I regard that as the launch of what I call my diversity career. Certainly. I had one that stands out in my mind, which was not necessarily something I was particularly proud of, but going through the fellowship exams was tough for me, and the reason was that I wasn't preparing properly. That's really what the reason was. And I had a situation. I have a very dear friend who he's Jamaican. He was living in Ohio where I was. And I went to visit him one time, and I had just failed an exam, and I was very despondent. And he knew that I was very despondent, and I told him, I don't know, don't know what's going on. I don't know what to do, this and that. And just before I was leaving where he was in Youngstown, Ohio, he handed me a card and said, take a look at this as you ride home. I used Trailways bus or something like that for some reason. And I opened the card, and it reminded me to believe in myself. And I broke down in tears on the bus, that he was so sensitive to just remind me and give me that confidence. And after that, I sort of figured out, there are things that my peers are doing and succeeding that I'm not doing. So here's what John needs to do: turn the ship around, and then success became a little more predictable. So that one sort of stands out in my mind. Certainly being elected to the SOA board in 2013, and I attribute that to the fact that I was the president of the IABA. I think that is what caught the attention of folks who encouraged me to run, and that was a huge privilege for me. And then, of course, being elected president-elect is historic to me, and I don't take it lightly. And I take the responsibility very seriously. In terms of what I'm proud of, I think I'll just say over the years, one of the things I used to find at Nationwide is that folks would get into one line of business, individual life, and spend their whole careers there, and get well rewarded for doing that, get promoted, and so on and so on. And I always felt like I wanted to be a little more eclectic. And so I'm proud of the fact that I did pensions when I started. I did several years of life insurance. I did 6 years of OPEB, which is a derivative of pensions combined with health. And then I sort of ended up my career as a life insurance regulator and participating in that world. So I'm proud of the fact that I really participated successfully in 4 different fields.
Outstanding.
So turning to you now, Stafford, you're probably not at the highest point of your career at this point. You're still a young man compared to me, but what sort of high points have you feel like you have attained that you feel gratified about, and perhaps I would add to that, what is it that you hunger for the future?
Yeah, I hope you're right that the story is not fully written yet, that there's still some more to write on this journey. But working for North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, which was the oldest and largest Black-owned life insurance company in the country, was certainly an honor, and gave me a lot of career pleasure and highlights, if you will. And I have several connections to the company, but one was Jim Parrish, who was the executive vice president at North Carolina Mutual when I was in college. And Jim was kind enough to take my call. So if I had a call curious about the actuarial profession, I would call. His assistant would answer the phone, and she said, "Oh, it's Stafford. Okay, hold on, let me get Jim." And Jim would jump on the phone. He's like, "I'm in a meeting right now. Do you need me, or can I call you back?" And just as a young man, trying to break into the profession, that meant so much to me. And then so years later, to come back to North Carolina Mutual and actually work there and really to try to help prolong life. It was having some challenges financially at the time. And so I really wanted to come in and help it prolong life. On the D&I side, much like you, when I was really, really young in my career, I got involved with D&I, now called Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, but it was D&I then. And Mark Preminger, who was the CFO of Cigna Healthcare, which at the time was the largest healthcare company in the country, would come out of his office and sit down at my cube and want to talk about how to make the actuarial profession more diverse.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, people jockeying for Mark's attention. Hey,
yeah,
how did he get Preminger to come to his cube? And it was a cube at that time. But he also helped me professionally. Mark had a rule that if you were in the room, you needed to have an opinion. He didn't care what you were doing in the room, but you needed to have an opinion. And then he would ask you, "Are you willing to bet your house?" to see how serious you were about your opinion. And so what I found was that getting involved with D&I really helped put me on the radar, but also helped me professionally. And so that was a lesson learned and an accomplishment that I'm really proud of, that I got involved with D&I at such an early stage in my career, as opposed to waiting to a later stage. So those are two that I would point to, John.
Good. But you understated something, man. The second time you were at North Carolina, when you had a chief title something in there that you didn't mention?
Yeah, I was vice president and corporate actuary at the time. So I had all of the valuation functions, all the pricing functions, the mergers and acquisitions, the investment strategy, all of those pieces put it into me, and then eventually underwriting a new business as well. So
that's great.
Yeah, it was a good time. So, John, when it comes to leadership, you've had a lot of leadership opportunities throughout your career, as you've highlighted for us. How do you define leadership? What does that really mean to you? Can you elaborate on that for us?
Sure. As you say, there's a lot of things written about leadership and various forms of leadership, situational leadership. For me, it's pretty simple. Leading is influencing. You can influence a situation or a committee or a group without being a designated leader. And even if you are the designated leader, you might be the designated leader with no influence. And so the point of it is to always, to me, the point of it is always to be influencing. And so if I'm not influencing, then I'm not leading. And so what is influencing? Well, you usually think about it as giving directions. I would tell everybody what to do. But I find what I find a little more subtle, but also effective, is asking good questions. And so I find that to be a secret sauce, what I call a secret sauce, where I ask the question, I may not know the answer, um, but the fact is that the people who know the answer, once they provide it, that influences the direction of whatever the effort is. And so I find it an indirect, but also very effective way to sort of be providing leadership. Um, Interestingly enough, during the campaign, I had someone write to me an email, said, John, we've never met, but I've heard you asking questions on NAIC calls, and you ask such thoughtful questions. I'm going to vote for you. So I replied, well, thank you very much. And while you're at it, please encourage your friends in the office to do the same. And the person said, yes, yes, I will, I will. And so, so maybe these asking of questions also got me a few votes along the way. But I find it a very effective way to sort of provide leadership. Nobody knows everything, and so I consciously work at that. Whenever I'm going to a meeting, I sort of think in advance what question that I ask that can be valuable to the group, not necessarily just to me, valuable to the group, so that the answer will be useful. So I'll turn back to you. You've been, as long as I've known you, you've been a leader in one capacity or another. Um, and maybe you have some advice for others as to how they can become an effective leader. Or maybe let's start with you. How do you make yourself an effective leader? What do you think makes you effective? And then what advice might you have to offer others on the matter?
Sure. Yeah, in a single word, it's energy. I've always believed that example was far better than instruction. We have a poem in my fraternity called Live Your Creed. And so I've always tried to run exceptionally hard and encourage other folks to run with me. So that's really been the secret to my leadership. I always set aspirational goals. So having that vision of who and what we could be has been a hallmark of my leadership style. And then convincing other folks that these are the right goals and making them shared goals as opposed to Stafford goals, and getting us all running in the same direction. I've also found that starting small and young is important. I believe that I've been a leader at my jobs because I've been a leader outside of my job. So the leadership opportunities that IABA afforded me, the leadership opportunities that Omega Psi Phi fraternity afforded me, really allowed me to go and say to the job, no, I haven't managed but more than 2 people here at the job, but I managed 25 people over at the International Association of Black Actuaries. I managed 200 people over at Omega Psi Phi fraternity. I have what it takes. And so that really has served me well in my career. But energy, passion, vision, doing it by example, not by instruction, have all been hallmarks of my leadership. And so I encourage people to raise their hand small. Do you want to lead a committee? Do you want to be part of a committee? Then lead that committee. I think I started on the mentoring committee under Pat Robinson L. Powell back in for IABA back in '96, and then really transforming that into becoming the vice chair of the committee, and then the chair of the committee, and then ultimately vice president of the organization under Sharon, and then president. So those are some of the hallmarks, and I really do encourage people to get involved in their organizations. Even at work, we have business resource groups now, or employee resource groups, where there's really opportunities to be on the communication committee of that group, or to even lead the business resource group in your company. So there's just so many opportunities now for folks to lead. So really raising your hand is kind of that first step, and then being the type of leader that folks want to follow. If you're not that, if you're just giving orders, that can be really, really tough. So.
Mhm.
And so as we move from leadership, we none of us got here by ourselves. I didn't get here by myself. You didn't get to where you are by yourself. What are those influences on you, both in the past, but as importantly, who's influencing you now as you think about how you get things done and how you want to lead, whether it be the SOA or just in general?
Mhm. Thank you. Well, in respect to the past, I think I'll start with the genetic influence, and I will credit my father with that. I mentioned he did a PhD in mathematical physics, which means that he was excellent at both of them. He gave me some of the maths, but none of the physics. I was I was never good at physics, and and later on, fortunately for me, I was able to pick up statistics, which actually may not even have been a subject at the time that when he was in university. Um, uh, my father and I lived together only for 6 years because that was when my parents separated, and he never lived anywhere close to us. So his influence on me directly was very limited. And he actually, so we separated in 1968. Sorry, 1960. He died in 1968 of prostate cancer at age 38, which is actually, it's very rare for someone to die of what is called an old man's disease. But he never lived in Jamaica, so his influence was limited to more or less the genetic side of it. So on the personal side, I was raised by women. My mother had two sisters, and the three of them were professional women. My father had two sisters, and they were medical doctors. They went to Howard University in the 40s and were pioneers actually, because they were probably among the first Black women from the Caribbean to pursue that profession. I know they were not quite the first, but certainly one of the two of the early ones to pursue that profession at a time when the West Indies did not have a university of its own. So those things are imprinted on me. I have two sisters, both of them accomplished academically and professionally, and I have two daughters as well. So there's women all around me in my particular situation. On the professional side, I'll start with my first teachers, who were Asta Duggan and Kathy Lynn, who sort of taught me to be very thorough. At those days, calculations were done pretty much by hand in actuarial, and we got our first laptop while I was at R. Watson and Sons there, and started using it and learning a little bit about BASIC. So I give them some credit. You were an influence, Stafford. I don't know if you realize this, but during your tenure as president, if I remember right, you started the affiliate program, and you also started the Corporate Advisory Council. Um, I must say that was pretty brave of you to think that people would actually pay $10,000 to be a part of the IABA. That's pretty bold, but you were right, and that thing, as I understand, that entity is still thriving today. But when you started out with the affiliate thing, that became years later. So you served 2002 to 6, I served 10 to 13. And that became the key to my presidency, was to, because I didn't think that the IABA should be just an annual meeting affair. And so we put a lot of work, Jeff and I put a lot of work into building what we call the affiliate framework, and, um, and trying to strengthen that side of the organization to where now it is really much, much more of a year-round organization. Um, so I give you credit for influencing, providing that influence. I tend to seek out mentors on a situational basis. And so I have lots of mentors, and I don't hesitate to, figure out, I need some guidance on such and such, and then try to figure out, who is the best person to give that guidance. So I don't have like a formal, continuous mentor in that regard. So in my new role as president of the SOA, I don't have anyone that's designated. I'll joke and say, I don't know anybody ahead of me that has 3 passports. But but I know that there are several former presidents. They've already indicated that they would, they'll be quite willing to provide any advice. And of course, the one that I'm closest to personally would be Mike McLaughlin.
Sure.
He and I actually went to the same high school in Kingston, and he preceded me as president of the SOA. So um, and so those are sort of my influences.
Very nice. Very nice.
You've had a lot of successes so far, professionally, leadership. Anyone that knows you thinks highly of you, but you're not, unlike me in a sense, you're not done yet. And so, what does success mean to you, or what do you think you will consider success when you come to the end of it and you look back? What do you think you would want to be able to say about yourself that defines you as successful?
Yeah, John, it's interesting. That's changed over time. As I mentioned to you, particularly when I was in college and still today, I'm motivated by money. And so certainly attaining and moving up the corporate ladder had been and continues to be something I'm interested in. I've always looked at what's the next job and what do I need to build in my skill sets in order to attain that next job. I don't have an end point in mind. Certainly, an executive vice president or a president role would be an outstanding accomplishment. But here's what I've learned over the years,
Mhm.
that I'm not happy if I can't impact the culture of an organization and if I can't make it more diverse and easier for people of diverse backgrounds to really find happiness with inside an organization. The way I like to term it is not everybody was invited to the table. And some folks were invited to the table, but not offered the opportunity to eat. And
Mhm.
so I do see as a senior leader, it's my role and my responsibility to make sure that a place is set for everybody that wants to come to the table and eat, and that we have an equal opportunity to get there. So I've really learned over the years to be passionate about making sure that everybody's got an equal opportunity to come to the table and participate in a similar level of success, however they define that success for them. So I'm really, really passionate about that. Yes, I want to continue rising up in my career, but I have to make sure that other folks have that same opportunity to be successful in their careers. And so that piece is super important to me.